Danny Sprinkle's recruiting class takes a big hit.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Lars, we've got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. But before we get there, just a quick reminder, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure you click that subscribe button down below. Click that little bell as well so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. Leave a like on the video as well. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review. All that does help us out a lot. Make sure you follow us on social media at Locked On Huskies on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're everywhere with a lot of fun stuff. And Lars, speaking of fun stuff, we got to talk about Tacario Davis and Denzel Boston, who are finding their names on those super fun, I love them, way too early big boards and mock drafts of 2026. But we got to spend some time on basketball. It's our bad. We have not gotten a chance to talk about Bryson Tucker. We'll get to him and some other transfer portal notes, but we were kind of waiting for this. We heard about it a few days ago. This might happen. The big news is Washington's top commit, 4-star forward Niko Bundalo, has asked for a release from his Big Ten athletic scholarship agreement and will be looking elsewhere.
It's a frustrating, loss. It's a big loss, but when you look at the overall roster, I'm sure Danny can figure out a way to replace what Niko would have brought into the program. Because when you look at the transfer additions, you had a bunch of guys in the front court. Niko could have played, might not have played, or could have redshirted. That's a loss that, the way that Danny recruited so well in the 2025 class, you can look and think, okay, he can figure that one out. Maybe even if you have to go back into the portal for somebody or whatever, you can figure that one out. It is a loss, but it's not a loss in terms of when you're looking at the other additions. It wasn't like that guy was the glue keeping everything together. It's a loss, but it's not worth oh my gosh, now we got to go find a massive addition in the front court or two. It's you just got to go, kind of fill that role out.
So let's talk about this from the negatives first, and then I'll get into just some of my other thoughts on this, because I wrote about this over on Huskies Wire a little bit. But I look at this and I say, Niko, if he were to fill out his frame, was going to be a really nice threat in the Big Ten, where this is a guy who shoots three ball really well and is just a really skilled offensive player, where there are so many things that he would have done really, really well in Sprinkle's offense. I think that he's somebody who really would have played that stretch 4 position really well. And like you said, I feel like after all these additions, probably would have redshirted this season, because he needed to get bigger and get stronger to be able to hold up in the post. Like we saw, the team I really enjoyed watching in the NCAA tournament was Michigan, and watching what that combination of big men was able to do in the paint. Like I look at Niko and I say, I don't think his frame was ready for that physically. And I don't mean that as a knock. I mean that this is an 18-year-old coming out of high school. That's okay. That's stuff that's going to happen. Not everybody is AJ Dibansa, right? Not everybody is Cooper Flagg and is ready to do that right away. So I look at Niko and I say, I think that's one of the reasons that you went out and you got so many of these other pieces from the portal, where, I look at Jacob Ognisevich and what he's going to bring on both ends of the floor. I look at, all the centers that you bring in, and I bring up his name last because I think this is kind of a big crux of this, is I look at Hannes Steinbach and I say, this is somebody who you go read some of the, it's certainly not our cup of tea, but for those who it is, you look at some of these draft reports, some of these rankings of international prospects, and Hans is one of the top 5 players in Europe. Like that is a consensus, where I feel I've seen some people that have him as high as number 1. Like he is that level of prospect, and he looks a little more physically ready than Niko is right now. And this is something where if Niko came in and expected to be a big part of the rotation, that's understandable. His acumen and everything he's been able to achieve up to this point certainly would just, I don't want to say just like give that vibe off, but it's something that he has earned to a certain extent. And if Washington says, especially from the perspective of his camp of, hey, we really like where you are right now, but we've brought in all these other guys to give you some time to lift some weights and get ready for the physicality of a Big Ten schedule. And if he said, I'm not too comfortable with that, I would rather, go somewhere where I have a chance to be part of a rotation right now, I think this might be a move that in the long run might not be the best for Washington just in terms of, what that could look like 2, 3, 4 years from now. But in the short term, it's something that, might free up some rotational space and some NIL money. And I'll get to that in a little bit.
If you think about it, that also kind of could work in UW's favor, where nothing prevents him from transferring to UW in 2 years, where Danny could say, hey, now we have that opening. Now you have 2 years of playing time. We still have the relationship built up. It's one of the things Danny always mentions, like, hey, so-and-so had a relationship with him. So-and-so had a relationship with him. And now you can look back and think, hey, go get your playing time. We have no problem with that because we don't. And the other side of that coin that you're alluding to is Danny's got to win. Danny's got to win and win now. And it's not that there's pressure on him, but I mean, Danny knows that. Danny didn't want to lose as much as he did this season. So when you're thinking about it, well, if you're Niko, I want to play next season. I want to be able to show, hey, I want to show these coaches if I do decide to transfer that I could actually, add that weight, play at a lower level, maybe play at
I don't think he's playing at a lower level. He'll end up in a power conference, but your point stands.
Exactly. And so in that, just you want to play, go play. We can figure it out down the road if you want to come back, transfer back, all those sorts of things. He's leaving on a good note where he asked for the release. UW granted it easily. There was no contention. It's like, hey, no, now you got to pay us a buyout or all these crazy things. Like, no, we got Hans. And I think that was the important addition that you mentioned, because when that addition came in, I was like, ooh, you already had a 4. How are these numbers going to work out? And now we see how it works out. And I think I'm curious because I think with Hans' pro experience in Europe, that's also the other more appealing side of this, where he's got that level of experience where Niko's great, but he doesn't have that. And I think when you're looking at Danny thinking, if I got to choose one or the other and I need to win, I need to play a guy as a freshman, and I have more faith in Hans than I do in Niko.
Some of the rumblings coming out about just what Hannes Steinbach will bring on both ends of the floor is promising. It's really, it's exciting from, what you might hear just coming out of Washington's camp about, hey, we think that this guy is going to be able to contribute right away. And, I listed off what that front court might look like. It's not shocking that there was an odd man out, right? That was going to happen at some point, no matter who it might be. And I'm interested just to see just how this roster is going to round out, because it already sounded like, even before this happened, that Washington wanted to take 1 or 2 more guys in the transfer portal. And, there's still a couple of big names out there where we looked at it. We had several conversations with our insiders about Washington State wing Cedric Coward, what that might look like. Obviously that's not coming to fruition. There are a few other names that are out there where it's, hey, I could see this being a fit already. And now with just a little bit more of a spot available, it makes a little more sense. Where one guy who I'm going to talk about a little bit after the break as well is Christian Nitu from Florida State, where this is that kind of guy where if we saw Danny Sprinkle fly all the way across the country to Tallahassee to watch him work out. And he's somebody who's in that similar just kind of mold of Bundalo, where he's big, long, has just kind of those skills that you're looking for, but maybe needs some time to develop, where he's really skinny right now and just needs to continue to bulk up and add weight and add strength to his frame. And he's that kind of guy where if they decide to prioritize Christian Nitu now, there's a spot available for him where he doesn't need to play this year, where he played a little bit of Florida State last year and, certainly helped his development a little bit. He didn't necessarily contribute in a big way, but I look at what that might bring to this roster in a year, in 2 years, where you give him some time to just sit there and develop and watch Matty Traore in front of him, who's a really similar player, and just watch some of these other guys and just continue to learn and continue to soak that in, where he is just a really raw prospect. You can find a way to make that work long-term. And Lars, that just kind of leads into a broader conversation we need to have about some of these other transfers that could be coming in. Right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. So, Lars, before we get into some of these could-be players, let's talk about the one who, it's our bad, we got wrapped up in spring practice and everything else, where we've talked about a lot of the transfers that have come in, but we didn't mention Bryson Tucker, a former 5-star recruit in last year's class who spent 1 year at Indiana. He had a dislocated pinky. Hey, I know what that feels like. That kept him out for the last month or so of the season. He was a rotational player there. And I feel like he might end up in a similar role here, but this is a really nice high upside take for Danny Sprinkle.
Exactly. One of those where you're not necessarily saying he's going to be a starter, but you know he's going to be in the rotation. You know you're going to find a way, and probably maybe in 25, 20, or 26, 27. Yeah, the basketball schedule is so weird because it's 25, 26, 26, 28. So next season, not this coming fall, but that would be when you're looking at being a starter. But that size at 6'7", probably playing the 3. You're just looking and thinking, just give us some size, give us some, potential. When you mentioned the 5-star status, that's kind of what you're looking for, where, how many 5-stars hit, how many don't. You're just looking at that potential. And when you're looking at a rotational piece, probably 6, 7, 8 off the bench, yeah, like that's exactly what you're looking for. And the fact that he already has that Big Ten experience at Indiana and knows how to play up at the level of competition, or even practice at the level of competition, where obviously, as you mentioned, he didn't play as much last season, but didn't sound like he was expected to as much. Again, you also mentioned there a little bit of injury there. So I think maybe showing that he can do it at Washington is kind of what Danny's driving at here.
Absolutely. It's something where you mentioned it. The Big Ten level of competition is something that was really important here. That was something that Danny told us at his end of season press conference was something he was looking for in the portal, were experienced guys who know what it's like to play through the rigors of a Big Ten schedule, where he played in 24 games, came off the bench in all of them, and was fine. He was a decent role player. He needed to get a little bit more consistent with his shooting, but who's to say how much the finger injury, might have hampered him on that front. And that kind of leads into the conversation that we need to have is what else this is going to look like. I want to stick with Christian Nisu here for a minute, because it's one of those things where there was always going to be a spot open for a developmental redshirt sort of prospect, and Nitu seems to be just that. And it's one of those things where, we don't have numbers, and even if we did, we wouldn't be really that willing to share what they might be at this point in time. But you look at what Niko Bundalo, who is a top 40 prospect in the country, might have been making in one season, or through his first season at Washington. Now, whatever that budget is, it's a little bit more freed up to not only, go out and find one of these high upside developmental guys that you might like, but you can also go get a bigger name. And I think you want to stockpile the roster first. And that's why I wanted to stay with Nitu, because he's got that skill set, that big frame to sit around, develop, and do all those things that you want to. And then, Frank Kepnog's out the door after this season. Jacob Ognisevich is as well. And all of a sudden, Danny talks about that continuity on the roster. You have a little bit of that through the transfer portal.
Exactly, where that's kind of the almost tricky thing where you're not, given, Niko was looking for playing time, you're not expecting to find another guy who's probably in that similar mold, but Christian's that perfect example where you're looking at a guy 6'11", 220-ish, 230-ish, whatever you want to call him, but 6'11", a guy that you can say, hey, you might not be a starter. We got some other pieces, but we want you to, play 15, 20 games. So next season, you're looking at being a potential starter, and you've already had, a dozen, 24 game reps under your belt at Washington, plus your time at FSU.
Well, so I disagree with you there. I don't think it's that, because I think that there's another piece out there in Darian Williams where you can make that work, right? Where if you bring in Christian Nitu, it's, we want you to sit on the bench. We have 5 guys in the front court right now that are already, ready and willing to contribute. And they have been a little bit more proven, where he averaged like less than 2 points and a little over a rebound a game at Florida State. So it's, let's give you some time to develop, because, as if you go in and read some of those scouting reports on him, that's what it was. It was the, hey, this is a really nice take for Florida State. There was some interest for some other really talented programs. Arizona State, I believe Creighton was in the mix as well, where it's, hey, this guy's got that upside, but he requires patience. And that's what Washington is able to afford with him. And that's, when you look at some of the long-term outlook around Niko, that's what it was. he is a big prospect with all world potential, but he might require a little bit of patience just in terms of the physicality of the college game. So if you bring in somebody like Nitu, you can afford that now, is more the point. Where I look at Darian Williams, for example, one of the top wings remaining in the transfer portal, and I think that's where this spot sort of lies, where you look at what this roster is, especially in the backcourt, and there's a lot of potential there, whether it be Komari Peterson, Wesley Yates, Zoom Diallo, the freshman, and Cortland Multrew, and JJ Mandequit. You have a nice rotation there, and you've got a couple of nice pieces that are, true fits for that wing spot right now in Bryson Tucker and Jasir Rencher. But if you're able to bring in a top flight acquisition at that spot as well, which is kind of what it sounded like this team wanted to do, or I throw out Darian Williams because he's one of the best names out there in the transfer portal. And that's what this coaching staff has been going after the whole time. And I look at that and I say, you add somebody like that to your roster, and all of a sudden, it just continues to just climb and climb and climb, which is exactly what Danny Sprinkle needs ahead of his second year in the Big Ten.
Absolutely. Well, I think the one consensus, no matter who they end up picking or who ends up choosing Washington out of the group that we mentioned, Danny is a guy who's going to go coast to coast, up north, south, all over the world to find the right guy to find. And so in that, whoever they end up choosing, however it ends up working, we both trust, I think, at the end of the day, Danny's going to find the right guy because, as we've kind of alluded to, you have 90%, 95% of the roster already built. You're not looking for that guy to say, hey, you know what? We have almost every piece. We just need the guy to bring it all together. No, you already got everybody to bring it together. You can add one more piece like a Darren Williams. But to me, it's more like, I'm just curious, which one is it ended? How is it ended going to fall? Because
why can't? Well, let me just ask you this question as you talk this out. Why can't it be both? Because I think it absolutely could be.
I think it can. I'm just kind of working through my head, like, how can Danny pull it off? Whereas, like, what is it going to look like at the end of the day? Where you painted the picture, but just to me, like, does he go that route, or does it come maybe a little bit of half and half, both? Or you kind of choose one or the other? Like, I'm just curious, like, because I agree with your point of you could go both, but I'm just thinking in this day and age, are you going to be able to find two guys that can actually make that work?
So I think you can, and that's a big part of this. Is let's look at Jasir Rencher, for example, somebody else who we haven't really gotten a chance to really dive into. And this is something where he's a really nice high upside prospect. He shoots the ball really well. He flipped from Texas A&M after Buzz Williams left for Maryland. So you got a really nice acquisition there for somebody who you just barely lost out to initially on the recruiting trail to Texas A&M. So you're able to get him back, and he's one of those similar prospects where if he's willing to, obviously he understands what's going on with you need to get more pieces on the wing. You bring in Bryson Tucker. And if you want to bring in one more guy at that position, you can afford to be patient with him. And if he's willing to, redshirt and be patient and understand, hey, this is what's best for my long-term development right now, there you go. Where that's a big part of this as well, where, you can look at it again in just like in the true backcourt where Cortland Multrew and JJ Mandequit. You have both those guys, and both of them have just really exciting potential long-term. And just building through the portal the way that Danny was kind of forced to this season, you were able to have some of those luxuries where if those guys come in and they earn playing time, awesome. You are never going to complain about that. But by building the roster this way and by adding a lot of these, 1 year experienced sort of guys, whether it be Komari Peterson, Jacob Ognisevich being the prime examples there, you're afforded that luxury of, if these guys are willing to be patient and just earn their spot, if they come in and win it right away, awesome. This is going to be great for you long term. But if they're, they show, hey, we need a little bit more development here or a little bit more there, you're afforded that luxury by building heavily through the transfer portal for one season. And then you can find a way to continue with a healthy mix of portal acquisitions versus high school recruiting in 2026 and beyond, assuming things go well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say supplement in the portal, where like Jacob is a supplemental piece, where a key piece, but you're supplementing, where you're just, again, the pun intended, you're sprinkling in the transfers, but he's really still building through the high school ranks. So I think to your point about that second transfer, where you go get a Williams, and then whether it's a guy, whether it's Nitu out of Florida State or a high school guy that we haven't even talked about, that second player that can be the long-term developmental guy, that's probably the other route you're going there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing where, as we just kind of look at what this roster is going to be long-term, there's a lot to just, I want to say be excited about, because Danny has proven this offseason that he can recruit. He's also proven that he's got the resources, which is something we use a lot of times when we talk about football as well, is the resources are there for this program to be successful. Now, the question is putting it together on the court. And I don't think you or I have any doubts about what Danny's on-court ability as a coach is. But as he has said multiple times, and, we were certainly wrong about, is this was a multi-year rebuild process. Now, as he gets into that second season, it's okay. You have the pieces in place to take a big step forward. Now it's on this coaching staff to actually do that. But Lars, speaking of football, we got to switch gears here because, as we've said, Washington has some high-end talent on this roster. So Lars, as the everydayers and you know full well, I am a huge nerd when it comes to the NFL draft process, where it is April 29th as we record this, and I'm sitting here reading some of these 2026 way too early mock drafts. I'm like, yeah, I can see the board falling this way. Ooh, this would be a lot of fun. This is really interesting. I know that's a me thing. I know the everydayers don't necessarily care about that as much as I do. But what I think they do care about is seeing Denzel Boston as the number 1 wide receiver. Shout out to JP Acosta from SB Nation, having him as the number 12 overall player in the class, and Tacario Davis being on that list as well at number 24, even despite, what he called a down season where he's an all Big 12 second teamer.
Again, but I do think when you look at the overall Arizona success last season, I don't blame him. I don't blame Tacario one bit for saying, hey, you know what? I did have a down season. And by his standards, kind of did in a way. But you look at it and think, I had this thought yesterday at practice and, kind of going into last week after the pro day where it's just like, there wasn't, we were talking about the NFL draft. It's like, wow, only Carson Bruner was drafted. Really? Washington really only got one guy. It's like, again, much like 2020, the Michael Penix, Roma Dunze, Jalen McMillan, everybody came back class. Next year, you're looking at the 2026 draft thinking Tacario, Denzel, Ephesians, Buddha potentially, Jonah Coleman, like the list, Carver. The list, you have so many more guys with pro potential than you had coming into the season. And that's not to cite the guys that were there the season, but just we got to call a spade on that one. And I think this is that reloading. This is that first Jed class where you can say, hey, look, now I'm at Washington. Now I'm getting my Arizona and Washington guys going to the pros, and we're reloading. And so when Jed and those pro scouts come to the pro day, you're saying, oh, hey, who's that guy? Oh, he's only a sophomore. Come back in 2 years. Come back in a year. And that's where Jed's building the organization, the program, as we call it, where that's the whole point of making Washington the destination, where you have so much talent on this roster, but none of it was draft ready this year. And so, now you're going to have Demond in a couple of years. Denzel being the prime example, obviously, because when you look at the two positions that Washington's probably going to be more known for going forward, and it already has been, receiver and cornerback, Jimmy Lake. Sure. Every year it was like, who's the cornerback Jimmy's producing? UW. I guess under Peterson, there wasn't really initially that wide receiver wave that we've seen over the past couple of years. Now that you establish that with the Rome, the Jalen, honorable mention Puka, now you can start saying, hey, you had Ted McMillan at Arizona. Now you got Denzel. Can you do it again at Washington? And by the way, we know the horses are on the roster to do it again at Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. I like where you're going with that. I want to talk about Tacario here, because my bold prediction that I'm going to continue to double down on every chance that I get is that Tacario is going to be the first cornerback off the board in the 2026 NFL draft. And a lot of that is just everything that we've seen from him, granted it's somewhat sparingly this spring, where I go back to his sophomore tape at Arizona. And it's not that I throw out his junior season, where it's obviously important to include all that, but it's exactly what he has told us on multiple occasions. It's the fact that he is working with John Richardson again, who was somebody that unlocked his potential and helped him go to the next level, which is why he came to Washington. And it's why he was considering coming to Washington after after the 23 season, when Jed and John Richardson and everybody else came up here. But as John Richardson called it, he made a grown man decision to stay at Arizona for that season and just kind of saw how the year played out. And I think that even if he were to have left after his junior year, he would have been picked at probably the top 2 rounds. But now that he has another year to just kind of refine his craft, and it's something where we've seen what 1 year in John Richardson's system can do for some guys, even just this spring, with Rashawn Clark being the prime example, that he has just such otherworldly potential. And I feel like that's unfair to say for a lot of corners, but Tacario is just an otherworldly body at the position. And I mean that in like just when you look at him physically. You look around the NFL, there aren't a lot of 6 foot, like legitimate 6'4" corners that move the way he does. There aren't a lot of 6'4" corners in general, let alone that size, that speed, just the ability to just flip his hips and mirror and match and do all the different things that he does and play press coverage. Where like the best example that I can give to shout out the Legion of Boom is Brandon Browner, where that was the big physical corner. And he doesn't play like Tacario Davis, where that's the best body type comparison that you can give. And they are two very different players, where I look at Tacario and he is somebody that this time next year, you and I are going to be talking about on this show as somebody that this coaching staff is hanging its hat on, saying, look what we were able to do for that guy. And it's just going to be really interesting to see how just his development is going to help push this program forward as a whole.
I'll double down on your bold take right now. Both Denzel and Tacario end up being the number 1 players at their positions going drafted first.
I like that.
Like both being the first position players off their board at their respective positions. And you look at it, the reason why I say it's exactly what Buddha told us after practice when I was like, how much does it help having Tacario and Ephesians, 2 long, big bodies that outside? And he said, like, yeah, teams ain't going to want to throw at that. And if you do, good luck. And I think that speaks to the confidence in the defense. It speaks to the confidence that the linebackers are going to be able to play. And that's what going and getting those other big pieces does, where everybody else is now allowed to play at their position, where you don't have to think about, oh, maybe I need to help out over there because I know the guy is kind of soft over there. I'm not making indictments about players who played this past season, but I'm just saying, using that as an example of you can play more confident, you can play more fast and free, which is what coaches always say, where the goal is to play fast and free. You're looking at that, and who personifies that more than anybody? Denzel and Tacario, and at their respective positions. That's why you have those guys at the top, but it's not them and then a fall off. It's you have multiple guys that you can say where Ephesians obviously isn't at the level of Tacario, but playing opposite again, maybe he gets up a few levels, maybe he improves his draft stock and those type of things where talent begets talent, and that's why you want to stack the talent like they did this offseason.
So I have a couple of things I want to unpack there because I think you hit the nail on the head, but I want to take it a step further. Where the first thing is you talk about playing fast and free. One of the biggest things that stood out to both of us when we talk about like Tacario and Ephesians is their off-field relationship, where those guys, to put it frankly, are just straight up goofballs at times. It's really funny. Where the other day I saw them just like they're dancing around to the music during stretch and like smacking each other on the helmet. And just doing things to show that, hey, these guys know each other really well. They're good friends. And that shows up on the football field because they know how to play together. They understand what the other one wants to do. And just they trust them to be in a certain position and do a certain thing. And I think that's something that showed up in Ephesians' play last season where, he just didn't have that same relationship with Thaddeus Dixon. And I don't mean that to knock that, but it's when you just have a clear relationship where you've played every snap together for 2 seasons already, it's just a little bit of an adjustment period, and seeing those guys reunite is something that needs to be noted going into this year. And then on top of that, it's something I know we mentioned on yesterday's show, but it's worth noting again when we asked Brian Odom to describe what it's like playing in a Brian Walters defense. One of the first things out of his mouth was elite DB play. Like that's something that is required in the scheme. And that's something where it's very different because it's a different sort of player, but when you watch Tacario Davis, you just can't help but think what he might be able to bring to this scheme after watching what Devon Witherspoon did. Again, it's not a fair comparison because Devon Witherspoon was not only a top 5 pick, but he also just plays a very different style of game. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like on the field in 2025 when we see Tacario Davis just kind of, I don't want to say do his thing because that's just not a descriptive enough analogy, but it's, when we see what he's going to be doing, because I think that September 27th, when Ohio State comes to town, is going to just be, hey, we want to see what Tacario Davis is really going to bring to this defense. That's the day that it's going to show up.
No, I'm where I stand on that Ohio State game. I think that's going to be the coronation coming out party for Washington, where, again, I know kind of slight segue here, but when Josh Payton said, hey, buy stock in Washington, we've been saying that for months. We've been saying that for like a long time now. And this is why, where you have all the talent and the talent now coming back for another year, where you have another year of Denzel with Damon, another year of John Richardson secondary, where, as good as Chuck Morrell was, and we were big fans of Chuck Morrell, it just wasn't the same at Washington the past few years under Kalen DeBoer. Now you're getting back into that true DBU mantra with a defensive back-minded defensive coordinator. No slight to Steve Belichick there, but just I think everything is shaping up to be the Washington way that we've come to know it. And now you have the talent, the coaching, Jed's second year. There's no excuses. And I think this is kind of what we expected a little bit more from last season, but we knew it was not going to come because you had, 75 new players on the roster? I mean, not 70, but it really felt like it. And so now this spring, you're like, all the new guys, it's like, no, those are all the pieces that we kind of thought were coming last season. And then you have, another year with Joe and another year with everybody else. There's a reason to buy stock in Washington.
Absolutely. And that's just kind of a great way to round this out, where it's those guys that we highlighted. It's Denzel, it's Tacario, it's Jonah Coleman, it's Damon Williams, but everything else is just way more solid now because the depth is there. And that's not something we saw at any point last season, where, especially along the defensive line, where, you and I have highlighted, like, it was just after Javon Parker went down, there was just no depth at the position, which is unfortunate. And Washington kind of had that trial by fire in their first season of the Big Ten. So now, as we approach year 2, having that top end talent is really, really nice, but that's where it's really going to show up. And, it's always nice when you have a couple of guys that could end up in the first round in the NFL draft. But Lars, until next time, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all every day tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you need questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.